So today we're going to talk about the atomic bomb, which is kind of a strange topic for English class, but as you know, it does tie into this story. So we're going to talk about some background information on the atomic bomb and what effects it has and kind of how that relates to the story. And then also, we're going to be analyzing two speeches regarding the atomic bombs that were dropped in World War II. So only two nuclear or atomic bombs have been used in world history, and they were both dropped by the United States on Japan in 1945. So we're going to read a speech that was delivered by President Truman in the days following the first bomb being dropped in Japan. And then we're going to read a speech delivered, let me do some quick math, 70 years later, when President Obama went to Japan. And it was like the first diplomatic trip that a president had taken to directly address that bomb dropping. So we'll kind of look at how their tones are completely different. So I wanted you to have a little bit of background about like what actually happens when a bomb is dropped. And then that will help you, I think, understand how, with 70 years of hindsight, the attitude toward that has definitely changed. So the historical context of this story is set in a scene of complete obliteration, which means that all of human existence has been wiped out by a nuclear bomb. So, or at least I should say, human existence in this particular place has been wiped out. It's possible that it's elsewhere, but I would kind of lean into thinking that most of the human race is gone because there aren't even any like first responders there to help. The fear of nuclear war was incredibly powerful in the 1950s, and the first bomb usage had been 5 years earlier. And then this was like the very beginning of the Cold War when Russia and the United States were kind of like going back and forth about who could get a bomb first. So when this story was written in 1950, this would have been like top of mind for people. So Ray Bradbury was writing into the fears of humanity at that point. So on July 17th, through August 2nd, the three Allied powers, the United States, the USSR, which is now Russia, and the UK, met to discuss peace settlements for World War II. So there's like two endings of the war. So in May, Germany surrendered, and it's like May 1st or May 2nd. May 6th? May 6th. Germany surrendered following Hitler's suicide. And then they continued to be in war with Japan. So there were like two different Axis powers, three actually. And we were still in war with Japan. So following that conference, or during that conference, the three Allied powers, the United States, USSR, and the UK, issued an ultimatum to Japan. So basically what that means is they told them, you need to do this or we are going to do this. So they said, you need to unconditionally surrender, which is completely give up, or we will amp up our air attacks. So we will continue to bomb your country in more force. So then in 1945, Japan still had not surrendered. So about a month later, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima. Sometimes you'll hear it also called Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These bombs destroyed almost everything in those two cities, and then hundreds of thousands of people were killed, either by the initial blast, which is like as hot as the sun, or it can also cause cancers or radiation poisoning, radiation sickness that can show up years later. So it costs a ton of human life, and I will show you some charts about that. So here are some pictures from the aftermath of those bombs. So this is like a cathedral, a church. You can see like all of the things are burned off of this tree, and this is all rubble of a building or of buildings. And remember, this is a city, so you'll see like structures in the background, but there should be structures here as well. You can see kind of footprints of those. It's a wider shot of the city. There's a church here. So then this is a before and after. So you can see that the river is obviously untouched, but like the streets, you can see shadows of them. but from an aerial view, it just looks like a field now. So pretty much flattened. And then this is a poem. It says, "Can we forget that flash? Suddenly 30,000 in the streets disappeared in the crushed depths of darkness. The shrieks of 50,000 died out." So we're going to talk a little about what actually happens in an atomic bomb, but essentially because it is so hot, people die in a flash and actually vaporize, like they disappear. So that's why it says 30,000 in the streets disappear. It's just they burn up so quickly that they vaporize completely. So there were people who they just never even identified. They never found. So the death tolls in Hiroshima or Hiroshima, that was August 6, 1945, and 90,000 to 146,000 were killed. And again, that's just because like they don't know. Like so many of it's not like there were bodies left over to be identified or counted. It's hard to say because not only did you have people just straight up disappear, but also it's hard to attribute later cancer deaths. Like it's unsure sometimes if those are just the body developing cancer or if they are actually related to the bomb. So it's these huge windows for those reasons. Like this one, it could be 39,000 or it could be over double that, 80,000. So you can see there's a 3-day gap here. So when they dropped on Hiroshima, if they didn't surrender, they said, we will amp up our air attacks. That's what the United States said. So 3 days later, they dropped another one. And after that, then Japan did surrender. So in total, looks like if we add these up, 129,000 to a possible maximum of 226,000 were killed. So huge numbers of people. How those people died. So my light shut off. That's fine now. So early death would be people who died instantly. So you can see that that's about a quarter of the deaths. And then these are people who were just lost, like they were never able to identify them. So if we combine those, it's about a third of the deaths. And then this is cancer deaths from 1950 to 2000, so people who developed cancers later. And then this is radiation-induced cancers. This is the rest of the population. So these are people who were in those two cities, but did not die from cancer before 2000. So these are people who I guess you would call them like unscathed survivors. They didn't end up, at least physically, having any sort of effects from the bombs. So it is possible to survive a nuclear bomb, which I feel like is a misconception that like if a bomb drops near you, you're instantly going to die, and that's not exactly the case. So as we look at these two graphs here of casualties, so in Hiroshima, the majority of people died in this middle range, so between 1 mile to 2.5 miles away from the actual bomb drop from ground zero. So ground zero is where like the bomb actually comes down and explodes. So a huge chunk of people died there, about 7,000, 26,000, but almost 40,000 people died in that range kind of outside. And then what's really interesting is very small number of people outside of 2.5 miles to 5 miles, small comparatively, died from the bomb. So if you're 5 miles away from a bomb dropping, it's not going to like necessarily affect you or kill you, which is definitely a misconception that I had before researching all of this. Like I thought like it could wipe out a whole country, but that's clearly not the case here. But then in Nagasaki, just a few days later, the vast majority of the deaths were in that central circle. So like if we're thinking of like concentric circles like this, vast majority were in the middle, fewer in that next range out, and then much, much, much fewer in that furthest range. So there's got to be a reason why the majority of people died in Hiroshima in that middle range, and the majority died in that condensed range in Nagasaki. So we can explain this by looking at the geography of those areas. We're really getting like cross-curricular here, talking about science, talking about history, we're all over the place. So this is Hiroshima. It's a flat area. So when the bomb dropped, all of the fire, all of the radiation kind of, let's imagine dropping a water balloon on a plate, so that it's all going to spread out, right? And then imagine dropping a water balloon into a bowl or a bucket. So when it falls, it's going to condense in that basin. Nagasaki is a valley, so there's mountains on either side. So all of the radiation and all of the fire, all of the destruction was kind of cushioned in because of those mountains. And that is why the vast majority of deaths happened in that concentrated area, because there wasn't anywhere for that radiation to go. Whereas here, it was able to kind of disperse out, and more people died of like radiation sickness and radiation poisoning in that further outside range. It's kind of an interesting, like, topographical study there. So what happens depending on how much radiation you're exposed to, it changes. So some of you who have had medical issues may have actually been exposed to radiation before. If you've ever had dental x-rays done, and they put that big heavy like blanket on your chest, it's almost like a weighted vest. They're doing that to protect you from radiation. So they're protecting you from taking in some of that. So that would be like down here, how much radiation you're getting exposed to. This is a chest x-ray. This is a CAT scan. So, I mean, you do get exposed to radiation in your day-to-day life. Not day-to-day life, but, this is the recommended limit in occupational exposure. So people who work in these sorts of labs do have to be very careful that they don't pick up any exposure. So they may leave the room whenever you have a CAT scan, or they may be wearing protective gear as well. So there is a limit to how much you should be able to take in. Here is possible radiation sickness. So the unit here is sieverts. So 1 sievert is where you could start to get sick. And you can see the window is very small. If you get exposed to much more than that, half of those people exposed will die within 30 days. So, I mean, it's kind of scary. Like, here's a CAT scan, here's where you die. So radiation is a very, very, very powerful force. I guess that's not really the right term, but it can cause some crazy stuff. So down here is distance from the bomb. So if you are half a mile away from the bomb, you're probably going to die almost instantly, versus, or sorry, not miles, kilometers, versus 4 kilometers, which would be a little under 2 miles. That's no different than a chest x-ray. Like, that range is really interesting. But you can see why people who are closer definitely felt this sort of sickness and this immediate death so quickly. So there's the mention in the story of those like shadows on the wall, the kid throwing the ball to his sister, and then the parents are like gardening and mowing. So that's called a nuclear shadow. You can see it here. So, like I said, a nuclear bomb is almost as hot as the surface of the sun. So it's intensely hot, and it causes like immediate burns, and it changes the colors because of the UV radiation. It's almost like everything gets a sunburn, because that's what happens whenever you're outside. You get like the UV radiation and you get sunburned. So, like, in front of this was plants, and those things were vaporized and they blocked whatever surfaces behind. So the color change didn't happen. So as a result, there's these weird like outlines, reverse shadows, really. Like, this part would still be wood or whatever this surface is, and in front of it is all of that burning. So it leaves these like haunting little shadow imprints. So this one is a person who's using a cane, and when this person was vaporized, what's left behind is this little shadow of that person. So this is an artist rendering of that part of the story, where you can see the kids playing ball, the mom is gardening, the dad is mowing, which I'm like, if you have a magic house, why are you mowing your own grass? But that's just me. That'd be like one of the first things to go for me. So this is kind of what that image would look like. And then the other really awful thing that happens in the immediate aftermath of an atomic bomb is nuclear rain. So you've maybe seen pictures of mushroom clouds before. So bomb comes down, it goes, and then it's like a big old mushroom cloud up here. So what happens is all of that is radioactive ash and dust, and it gets kind of mixed into water vapor in the air, and then it turns into rain. So then the rain falls in this like ashy black radioactive drops. So it is rain. I mean, there's water in it, but it's also radioactive and ash. So what's horrific is that that rain fell, and some of the victims were so thirsty and they had no idea what it was, and they were like, "Oh my God, it's water," and they drank it, and then that got some of them sick from radiation poisoning as well. So radiation sickness, this is kind of a chart of how quickly or how slowly it can happen. So immediately, here are the things that happen. And temperatures reach millions of degrees Celsius in the center of the explosion. The heat light's so intense that it's like the center of the sun. There's winds that are thousands of kilometers per hour. So, I mean, things could get blown over just from like the force of that bomb. The bomb releases radiation over a large area as it explodes. Within seconds, the heat flash vaporizes human beings. So all that's left is their shadows. The shadows were seen within half a kilometer of the blast. So again, a pretty tight circle. The heat is so intense that bones, flesh, skin, and facial features and eyeballs melt as well as bones. So it really is just like an instant radiation blast. And then the further people are away from the blast, they receive burns and are blinded by the flash. So if you looked at it, it's like looking at the sun. Within a day, high temperature fires raged for days, and they're so big that they have their own wind systems. So they were able to create almost like storm winds just from the fires. Buildings burn and collapse. In Hiroshima, most buildings within 2 kilometers were burnt to ash, and glass windows melted, which is incredible. People burnt alive and also suffocated from lack of oxygen because the oxygen is all used up in the fires burning. So oxygen feeds fires, and the fires were kind of stealing that. Surrounding environment is totally destroyed. Water is polluted with radiations, and humans and animals will die from drinking it. Within a few months, radiation sickness was set in for months after the bombing. There's no effective treatment for severe radiation sickness. You would die within days. Symptoms of radiation sickness include bleeding from the mouth and gums, hair loss, bloody diarrhea, vomiting, fever, and a terminal coma. In Hiroshima, thousands of people died from radiation sickness. Within 9 months, so remember, some women were pregnant. Babies who were exposed in the womb would also be exposed to that radiation. So some of them were affected. And some babies were born with illness and deformities, so like extra limbs or missing limbs. Radiation makes your cells do weird things. So some were born with like different cancers, extra fingers, like weird stuff like that. In Hiroshima, many children were born with smaller skulls than usual, which has led to severe disabilities. There's like a whole group of children born at this time who have radiation-induced disabilities. Within years, survivors develop leukemia, which is cancer of the blood or bone marrow. In Hiroshima, the younger people were at the time of the explosion, the more likely they were to develop leukemia, and many children were affected by it in the years after Hiroshima. And then within decades, even more survivors developed cancers of the breast, lung, and salivary glands, which is like what makes you spit in your mouth. In Hiroshima, more and more people developed cancers in the 1960s. That would be like 15, 20 years after. The closer you were to the blast, the more danger of cancer there was. So looking at this chart to try to figure out like how long it's been since the bomb was dropped in the story, we have evidence of these things. So we see that heat flash. So we know that they were within 5 kilometers or 0.5 kilometers, half a kilometer of the blast. And we also know that like nature around them is destroyed. So that has happened. And then the fires are out. There are no raging fires. So we know that it's probably not like the day before. We also know that the dog has radiation sickness. So the dog has those open sores and eventually dies, and it's like whimpering clearly in pain. So probably this nuclear bomb dropped like a few weeks or months before the story started, which is actually creepier because it means that that house has been doing like that whole routine for days, weeks, months. That's weird. The historical context for this is the United States was engaged in an arms race with the USSR, Soviet Union, now Russia. And it's what's called the Cold War. So the threat of nuclear war was just always there. So when Ray Bradbury was writing the story, it would have resonated with people, like they were in fear of this happening, to the point that kids in school, you know how we have like tornado drills and fire drills, they had bomb drills like this. So they were to hide underneath their desks, which was not really going to help you if there's a nuclear bomb. But there were pamphlets like this. People built bomb shelters. The Butler High School actually has a bomb shelter that they've since converted into the rifle range, because people were petrified of nuclear bombs. So they were kind of prepping for that. There was a whole PR campaign of Bert the Turtle. It says duck and cover. So it told people to like cover their heads. Again, I'm not really sure how much that would help you, but I guess if you were further away from the blast, it could. So if you're wondering, why did I just record like a 15-minute video about nuclear war? So Ray Bradbury wrote this story in 1950, which was only 5 years after those bombs were dropped. And the story really calls upon that fear that the nation was experiencing, that a rival nation might bomb us and that this could be our life. So part of science fiction is pointing out the potential dangers of technology, and developing a bomb that has the ability to wipe out humanity is certainly a danger of technology. So that kind of becomes a theme of this, that people have the ability to create a house that can like make your life so much easier and cook for you and do all these cool things. So we have the ability to create that technology, but we also have the ability to create technology that can destroy all the things we've built. So this was something that was in the forefront of minds in the 1950s, and Ray Bradbury is really writing for that time period. So as I told you, we're going to be looking at 2 different speeches about this bomb. So I wanted you to have a sense of what the bomb actually did, and I think that that will help you kind of call into focus Truman's tone. So why he's kind of celebrating the dropping of the bomb immediately after it happened. And then it'll help you understand Obama's tone decades later, because we have seen the effects of what this can do, as I just explained to you here.